The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the bonus show. There is sort of a quirky family story impacting extremist, outrageous, wild, and wacky Trump policy advisor Stephen Miller, which is that his uncle David Glosser wrote an op-ed, an editorial piece, calling Stephen Miller, his nephew, an immigration hypocrite, and saying that dozens of family members agree that Stephen Miller is a massive hypocrite on immigration and wanted him to publish the piece. His uncle's a retired neuropsychologist, and he said on CNN that he's been posting his opinions about immigration on Facebook for more than a year, but he eventually wrote this piece for Politico because, quote, the administration has had an increasingly hostile posture towards desperate people trying to get into the country. And basically the point of hypocrisy that he indicates is that on the one hand, Miller is responsible for and behind Donald Trump's hardening on his position on immigration, chain migration, all the different stuff that we've been talking about. And yet it is Miller's family that, because of their ability to immigrate to the United States historically, has led to him even being at the White House and having the opportunity to make policy. It's not a unique position. Most people, right? So we can say, all right, Native Americans were here before Westernization, I guess we would call it, or modern. I don't even know what you would call it. When those white people from Europe came over and started killing them haphazardly. We can also sort of, I guess, include the first people who came over, pilgrims and other settlers.
I guess, yeah.
Although I don't really know. I mean, they also just kind of came over and started living here. It's not exactly the method through which now people are allowed to come over. But put that aside, in the 1800s and the 1900s, tons of the families that are here now came during that time based on immigration laws that now Stephen Miller and Donald Trump want to change. And it is huge hypocrisy.
Yeah, if it wasn't for our more liberalized immigration policy in like the early 1900s, Stephen Miller's family would not have been able to come over here.
At all.
He probably, I mean, his family would have been killed in the Holocaust most likely.
Sure.
And so it does strike me as hypocrisy. It's very similar to Donald Trump being against so-called chain migration, and yet his mother and father-in-law, Melania's parents, both came over here through that method and got citizenship through that method. So I don't know how they deal with that cognitive dissonance. Maybe
I think
they just
it's
ignore
clear.
it altogether.
This is how they deal with it, and I've heard some of them say it. The country's full now. It's just, you can't have the same policy forever, right? When you're in the phase of trying to bring people in, you have one policy. When you have so many people that additional immigration is going to, this is what they would say, destabilize the economy, destabilize the country, cause crime, at some point you put a lid on it. It's not, hey, everybody come here forever. At a certain point, the rules have to change, right? They would make some kind of argument like that.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not like most people on the left, and certainly we're not advocating for open borders. It's not like everyone can just get in. There has to be some sort of vetting process, and we have that here in the United States. But just to put a lid on it altogether, I think violates or goes against what we are as a core in this country, which is a nation of immigrants.
Well, that's not how Laura Ingraham would define it, right?
No.
So we see the immigration, the source of Americans of immigration as part and parcel of what the country is. Laura Ingraham, on the other hand, based on her piece we did earlier this week, believes that whatever vision of America was the right one or was the accurate one has been destroyed by the immigrants that have come in. And it's just a matter of what vision you have. I agree with you, but I think that argument's a non-starter with these types.
And of course, Laura Ingram's also being a hypocrite on this matter. I don't know what her ancestry is.
Yeah.
But
Isn't
she also,
Ingram Irish? I don't know.
Is it? I don't know.
Or British? I'm not
Well, I don't know when her ancestors came over to the United States, but at the very least, she has 3 adopted children, 2 from Russia, 1 from Guatemala.
Yep.
And so you'd have to accept a open immigration policy just to get those kids in. Even if they're refugees, that's still part of immigration.
It's not chain migration, but it's if you're adopted in the United States by a citizen, you get citizenship. And it is still immigration policy that is not zero tolerance or a complete roadblock. But that's okay because she's a wealthy white woman. And so she's the right person to be deciding who gets to come in, even if it's a Guatemalan adoptee in her particular case. Let's talk about Tesla. What I may not, for too much longer, have to disclose that I own shares of Tesla stock because there may be no more shares of Tesla stock.
No, I think forever you have to disclose it. I formerly held shares of Tesla.
So Tesla, Elon Musk's automobile manufacturer, Tesla, is a publicly traded company. and shares of Tesla have been trading around $350, roughly, give or take. Elon Musk floated the idea that he wanted to take the company private. He says that he already actually has been talking to, I believe it's some rich Saudis of some kind, some private wealth fund in Saudi Arabia, to take Tesla private. When you take a company from public to private, you've got to buy out everybody who owns shares. And Elon Musk, at least on Twitter, suggested that they would do the buyout at $420 a share, which is about almost 20% more than what the share's publicly trading at right now.
Did you take that deal?
I wouldn't have a choice.
Right.
I have absolutely.
There's one holdout. There's one shareholder.
My few shares are not going to give me any leverage in preventing that from happening. So this caused absolute and total chaos, and now the board members of Tesla are scrambling to get Elon Musk out of control, under control rather. They believe that he's out of control, and it's not actually clear whether there's any possibility that this taking the company private thing is going to happen. I just don't know. They being the board of directors, have told him to stop tweeting, and he hasn't done that, and he continues to tweet things of dubious accuracy. I actually think, so Elon Musk is a very polarizing figure. Some people love him. They say he's the greatest entrepreneur, just greatest humanitarian, the ideas that he's got. Others think that he's sort of like a pompous prick. Yeah. And then people have opinions in between. I am increasingly thinking that he may have something going on psychologically that explains why he's all of a sudden tweeting very bizarre stuff.
Yeah, some people think he's a stable genius. Other people think that he's an unstable genius.
Sure.
I mean, I'm not the most well-versed in economics myself and the stock market and how all this stuff works, but I mean, it seems pretty straightforward to me that if he comes out with this tweet saying that he's considering making Tesla private, that's going to hurt the stock price and at least be bad for the company in the short term.
Well, not necessarily.
And that has happened to some extent. I mean, it's not like it's tanked, but you know, it's dropped maybe 2-3% over the past few days.
Every day it goes up and down 2%. Yeah. So I wouldn't judge anything by that. There's actually a different perspective, which is the idea of stocks and the stock market is that the share price reflects all known information about the value of the company. If it's credible that there will be a buyout at $420 per share, if people are rational actors and they believe that, the stock price should go up, because if the stock price is $350 and you know that at some point in the future you're going to be able to get $420 a share, you would start buying shares all the way up to $419 a share because it's money, right?
But it's instability, right?
Well, we don't know the truth. That's the problem. We don't actually know whether this is really a possibility or not. But if it's believable that at some point there will be a buyout at $420 a share, that should actually push the stock price up, because it would be we would have information that suggests that you will be able to exchange a share for $420. So if it's only $350, you should take that all day. If I know I'm getting $420 a share in 6 months and I can buy it now for $350 a share, I buy as many shares as I can afford. The X factor, as you're suggesting, is this actually happening?
Right.
We don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that would suggest that people are skeptical that he's going to go through with this, right? Because you would see more people buying shares of Tesla if they took him seriously.
I also don't know what percentage of all the shares Elon Musk holds, and that would also be a big factor in terms of how much power he would have to unilaterally decide on taking the company private. Of course, you'd also have to look at the operating agreement with the board of directors, and does the board have the ability to kibosh something like that, regardless of what percentage of the shares Elon Musk has? A lot of specific questions, but the broad strokes is the board of directors of Tesla is very, very worried about what's going on with Elon Musk, and I don't blame them because the tweets do seem erratic.
I wouldn't be surprised if Elon Musk is still working to get those kids out of that cave.
Yeah.
He could still be trying to do that.
He might not have gotten the message that they're out. Yeah, who knows? He seems to sometimes get messages a little bit late, I guess is how I would characterize it lately. We have we have a shared issue with Canada that Canada is now trying to deal with, which is that there is rising gun violence in Canada. And this has prompted people to call for the federal government to tighten some of the gun laws in Canada. But already there has been sort of preemptive political backlash because in Canada, a lot of people do have guns. It's a very different situation than in the United States. There are very rural parts of Canada where people own guns for different reasons. I think something like 80% of the Canadian population is within 100 miles of the U.S. border.
Yes. Yeah.
That's a tiny fraction of the land area of Canada. And then you have extraordinarily rural areas where the gun culture is very different than it is in most of the United States. And they have had what for them are significant gun violence issues. In 2016, 223 people murdered with a gun. That's up 23% from the previous year, highest rate in 11 years, according to Statistics Canada. And there are sort of competing influences here. Immediately, when gun violence goes up, some people who believe that tighter gun laws are the solution want tighter gun laws. The counter to that is, no, if we've got a gun violence problem, and this is a similar argument to one that's made in the United States, if there's more gun violence, we want more people to have guns to defend themselves. And the gun advocates like to say, because so many urban city dwellers in Canada don't have guns, they become targets for people who illegally obtain guns. Welcome to the conversation that's been happening in the United States for decades. Like, these are the exact arguments that are made on both sides here that we deal with all the time.
It sounds to me like they want to do some pretty standard things. Like, I mean, you know, one is a ban on handguns in the city of Toronto.
Yep.
Maybe you think that's a little bit too far, but the other stuff is pretty straightforward. It's like universal background checks, upgrading the registry. So I think it sounds pretty non-controversial. Where it gets more controversial maybe is when you have these provinces that are very diverse.
Yeah.
So like British Columbia, for example, out in the west, they have Vancouver, but they also have a vast amount of land. So whenever the population votes on some sort of gun control measure, the people who live in Vancouver are deciding for the entire province.
Sure.
And that's going to, you know, affect people who live out in the rural areas. And they don't like that so much because, on the one hand, the people who are using guns for the most part are held to the will of those people who live in the cities.
There are ways around that. I mean, here in Massachusetts, the laws in Boston are not the laws of Massachusetts. In Massachusetts, it's much easier to get concealed carry permits and all sorts of different permits to do things with guns. I'm sort of struggling for the right vocabulary here. But in Boston, it's extraordinarily difficult. In Boston, if you want to carry a gun, you have to go through a much more stringent process. You have to show specifically what risk causes you to want to get that gun. You have to meet with the police department, and it's a very, very difficult process. So there are ways, like if that's the only problem, you can solve that by Vancouver. I don't know enough about British Columbia politics and how Canadian law works, but conceivably, at least, Vancouver could pass different or more strict laws than what the province has.
You know what I found striking was the fact that Canada and the United States are similar countries when it comes to location, politics, geographical distribution, that sort of thing.
Are they? I didn't think so.
Well, they're right next to each other. I mean, come on.
Yeah, the countries are touching, but when you look at the distribution, I mean, Canada's got 80% of its population within 100 miles of the border, and then the rest of the country is almost completely empty. They are much more socially democratic than the United States. I don't know that I agree with the premise.
You're taking down the point I was going to
Okay, make the point anyway, but
I'll make the point.
Yeah.
Okay, so Canada's homicide rate is 0.4 out of 100,000.
Right.
The United States is 6 people per 100,000.
Right.
Why the difference there? If the countries are so incredibly similar,
Yeah.
what can we credit the difference to?
I think the answer is the countries aren't really that similar.
Oh,
we
okay.
speak English in most of it, although there's, of course, French Canada. I just don't think the countries are that similar. I think there are so many. I think we see them as very similar because they mostly speak English as their primary language, and they are close by, and they have hockey teams and basketball teams, but I don't think that the country is actually that similar.
See, I was going to talk about the cultural differences,
Yeah.
You know, the media, the influence of special interest groups like the NRA here in the United States,
Right.
The historical precedent, the Constitution, all that stuff, but you're just not willing to hear any of it, I guess.
No, I just don't think we need to go to that. I think that they're just very, very different countries already. Send me your thoughts, especially if you're in our Canadian audience. I know that sometimes the debate within provinces is very different than sort of what we get as the national debate here in the United States. Send me your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you, and we will have a brand new show and bonus show tomorrow.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.